The dinner rush at the Golden Note restaurant was in full swing. The smell of expensive steaks and seafood filled the air as waiters and waitresses moved quickly between tables. In the corner of the dining room stood a beautiful grand piano, shiny and black, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. Nina Garcia balanced 3 plates on her left arm while holding a water pitcher in her right hand. She had gotten good at this balancing act after 3 years of working at the fanciest restaurant in the city. Her feet hurt in the black shoes she had to wear as part of her uniform, but she kept a warm smile on her face as she served a table of businessmen in expensive suits. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else?" she asked, placing the perfectly cooked steaks in front of each man. "Another bottle of the red," said one man without looking up from his phone. "And tell the chef this steak better be medium rare this time." Nina nodded politely. "Of course, sir. I'll check on that right away." As she walked back to the kitchen, she passed by the grand piano. Without meaning to, her eyes lingered on it for a moment longer than necessary. That small glance held years of dreams and memories. "Order up," called the head chef as Nina pushed through the swinging kitchen doors. The kitchen was hot and noisy, a complete contrast to the quiet, fancy dining room. Cooks shouted orders while pots and pans clanged on the stovetops. "Table 5 says his steak isn't medium rare," Nina told the chef, who rolled his eyes. "It's perfectly medium rare. These people wouldn't know good food if it hit them in the face," he grumbled, but took the plate anyway. "I'll make him a new one." Nina's friend Thomas, another waiter, appeared beside her, loading his tray with appetizers. "How's your section tonight?" he asked, expertly arranging small plates of fancy food on his tray. Nina sighed. "Table 8 tipped $3 on a $200 bill, and Table 5 keeps sending food back." "Just another Tuesday. At least it's good money most nights," Tomas said with a shrug. "How's school going?" Nina's tired face brightened a little. "I've almost got that Chopin piece down. My professor says I might be ready for the showcase next month." "That's great," Tomas said, genuinely happy for his friend. "One day I'll be telling people I knew the famous Nina Garcia before she played at Carnegie Hall." Nina laughed and gave him a playful push. "Stop it, I've got to get through music school first, and these tips are barely covering my rent, let alone tuition." "Nina," called the manager, Richard, from the doorway. "Table 12 needs their check, and there's a new group at Table 9. Your section." "On it," Nina called back, quickly grabbing a notepad and heading back into the dining room. Table 9 had 5 well-dressed people sitting around it, 4 men and 1 woman. As Nina approached, she could tell from their watches, shoes, and the casual way they ordered expensive wine that these were very wealthy people. The kind who came to the Golden Note to show off rather than to enjoy the food. "Good evening. Welcome to the Golden Note. My name is Nina, and I'll be taking care of you tonight," she said, passing out menus. Most of them barely glanced at her, continuing their conversation about someone named Jenkins, who had apparently made a terrible investment decision. But one man, sitting at the head of the table, looked up at her with sharp eyes. He was in his 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a watch that probably cost more than Nina's yearly tuition. "We'll start with a bottle of your Chateau Margaux," he said, not bothering to look at the wine list. "The 2010, not the 2012. Nina nodded, knowing that bottle cost over $1,000. "Excellent choice, sir. I'll bring that right out." As the night went on, Nina found herself making dozens of trips to Table 9. They ordered multiple appetizers, tried several main courses, and went through 3 bottles of extremely expensive wine. The man with the expensive watch, who she overheard was named Thomas Reynolds, seemed to be paying for everything. The others laughed at all his jokes and agreed with everything he said. "He's some big tech CEO," whispered Lily, another waitress, as they stood side by side at the service station. "Started some app that everybody uses now. Worth billions, apparently." Nina glanced over at the table. "Well, he's running me ragged tonight, but at least the tip should be good." "Don't count on it," Lily said with a knowing look. "Those types are usually the worst tippers, too used to people doing things for them." Between serving tables, refilling water glasses, and running food from the kitchen, Nina found herself near the piano during a rare quiet moment. Almost without thinking, she reached out and lightly touched the smooth wood. Her fingers itched to play the keys, to feel the cool ivory beneath her fingertips. "You play?" The voice startled her, and Nina quickly pulled her hand away, embarrassed to be caught touching the expensive instrument. Richard, the restaurant manager, was watching her with an unreadable expression. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. It's fine, Richard said, surprising her. Do you play piano? Nina hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I'm studying piano performance at the conservatory. That's what I do during the day before my shift here. Richard raised his eyebrows, looking genuinely impressed. Really, huh? I wouldn't have guessed. Most people don't, Nina said with a small smile. In her black and white server's uniform, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, nobody would guess she spent her mornings playing Beethoven and Bach. Richard seemed to be considering something. Our regular pianist called in sick for Friday night. If you're interested, Nina's eyes widened. Really, you'd let me play? If you're as good as you say, Richard said with a shrug. It pays $200 for the night. Just classical stuff, nothing weird. I'd love to, Nina said, excitement bubbling up inside her. Thank you so much, Richard nodded once. Be here at 6 on Friday. Wear something nice, and don't be late. He walked away, leaving Nina standing by the piano with a huge smile on her face. The smile faded as she heard someone snapping their fingers from table 9. Waitress! More wine. Nina took a deep breath and headed back to the table where Thomas Reynolds and his friends were now loudly discussing someone's new yacht. As she approached with a fresh bottle of wine, she noticed the piano sheet music left on the stand by the regular pianist. It was a piece by Chopin, one of her favorites. As she poured the wine, she thought about her grandmother, who had first taught her to play on an old upright piano in their small apartment. Grandma Rose had been a music teacher all her life and recognized Nina's talent when she was just 5 years old. Your hands were made for music, Grandma Rose used to say. When you play, you make people feel things they didn't know they could feel. Nina had been playing ever since, practicing whenever she could find time. Even now, after double shifts at the restaurant, she would go home to her tiny apartment and practice on the electric keyboard her roommates had chipped in to buy her for her birthday. She would put on headphones so she wouldn't disturb them and play until her fingers cramped. Music was her escape. When she played, she wasn't a tired waitress with aching feet and a stack of bills to pay. She was free. What are you smiling about? Nina snapped back to reality, realizing she had been standing there holding the empty wine bottle, lost in thought. Thomas Reynolds was looking at her with curious eyes. Oh, nothing. Sorry about that, she said quickly. Can I get you anything else? Thomas looked at her for a moment longer than necessary, then turned back to his friends. Just the check when we're ready. Nina nodded and walked away, unaware that Thomas had noticed her looking at the piano earlier. Unaware that he had seen the longing in her eyes when she glanced at the sheet music. Unaware that this chance encounter would soon change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. As she continued her shift, serving food and clearing tables, Nina's mind kept drifting to the piano and to Richard's offer. $200 would help with this month's bills, but more than that, it was a chance to play on a real grand piano, to be seen as a musician, not just a server. Little did she know that in just a few days, that piano would become the center of a moment she would never forget. A moment that would begin with a challenge from the very man sitting at table 9, watching her with newfound interest as she moved through the restaurant with quiet grace. But for now, Nina just had to get through her shift. She picked up a tray of dirty dishes and headed back to the kitchen, passing the piano one more time, its presence a reminder of the dream she was working so hard to achieve. One long shift and one music lesson at a time. 3 days later, Nina arrived at the Golden Note for her regular evening shift. The restaurant was busier than usual for a Thursday night. A light rain tapped against the large windows, creating a cozy atmosphere inside the warm, dimly lit dining room. There's a big tech conference in town, Lily explained as they both tied on their black aprons in the break room. All the tables are booked and Richard is making sure everyone knows he expects perfect service tonight. Nina groaned. Great. Just what I need after spending 6 hours practicing for my recital this morning. How's that going? Lily asked, fixing her hair in the small mirror on the wall. I still can't get the third movement right, Nina sighed. And Professor Chen isn't exactly the patient type. He made Daisy cry yesterday. Well, at least you have tomorrow night to look forward to, Lily said, nudging Nina with her elbow. Playing the piano here instead of serving food. That's pretty cool. Nina smiled, a flutter of excitement rising in her chest. I still can't believe Richard offered. I've been practicing extra pieces at home just in case. Ladies, Richard's sharp voice interrupted their conversation. "We have customers waiting. Nina, you've got sections 3 and 4 tonight. Lily, you're on 5 and 6. The evening started in a rush and didn't slow down. Nina moved quickly between tables, taking orders, delivering food, and making sure water glasses stayed full. By 8 o'clock, her feet were already aching, but she kept a smile on her face as she worked. Then she saw him walk in. Thomas Reynolds strode through the front door like he owned the place. He wore a perfectly tailored dark blue suit and was accompanied by a different group than the one from earlier in the week. 3 men and 2 women, all dressed expensively and radiating importance. The hostess led them to the best table in the house, right next to the piano. Nina's heart sank when she realized they were being seated in her section, as if her night wasn't busy enough already. "Nina!" Richard appeared beside her, his voice low and urgent. "That's Thomas Reynolds at table 12. He's one of our most important customers. Whatever he wants, make it happen." "Got it," Nina said, taking a deep breath before approaching the table. "Good evening and welcome back to the Golden Note," she said with a professional smile. "My name is Nina, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Thomas looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Ah, you were our server the other night." Nina was surprised he remembered. People like him rarely noticed the staff. "Yes, sir. It's nice to see you again." "These are my business partners," Thomas said, gesturing to the group. "We just closed a rather significant deal, so we're celebrating tonight. Bring us your best champagne to start." "Of course. I'd recommend the Dom Perignon Rosé," Nina suggested. "Perfect. 2 bottles," Thomas said with a dismissive wave of his hand. As the night progressed, Thomas's group grew louder and more demanding. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu, sent back perfectly good dishes, and kept Nina running back and forth with special requests. One woman wanted her salmon, cooked exactly 4 minutes on each side, not a second more, while one of the men insisted his steak be Pittsburgh rare, a preparation style not even on the menu. Through it all, Nina maintained her composure, though her smile became increasingly strained. Other tables in her section were starting to look annoyed at the lack of attention, but there was little she could do when Richard kept appearing to remind her that table 12 took priority. After their main course, when Nina was clearing plates, Thomas leaned back in his chair, a glass of expensive bourbon in his hand. "So," he said, his words slightly slurred from the alcohol. "Who plays that?" He nodded toward the piano. "Antonio. Usually plays on Friday and Saturday nights," Nina answered, stacking dishes carefully. "But actually, I'll be filling in tomorrow night." "You play?" Thomas asked, his eyebrows rising in surprise. Nina nodded. "Yes, I'm studying piano performance at the conservatory." The woman beside Thomas laughed a little too loudly. "A piano student waiting tables. How quaint." Nina felt her cheeks grow warm but kept her expression neutral. She'd dealt with worse comments before. "Are you any good?" Thomas asked bluntly. Before Nina could answer, another guest from a nearby table approached. He was an older gentleman with kind eyes who had been watching the interaction. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Dean Phillips from the symphony. If you're playing tomorrow, perhaps I'll come by to listen." Nina's eyes widened. "The symphony? That would be. I mean, thank you." Dean smiled. "Always looking for new talent. Have a good evening." As he walked away, Thomas's expression changed. His eyes narrowed as he looked from the departing symphony director to Nina. "Interesting," he said. "A waitress who catches the attention of Dean Phillips." Nina, uncomfortable with the sudden attention, tried to redirect the conversation. "Can I interest anyone in dessert? Our chocolate soufflé is excellent." "I'm sure it is," Thomas said, still watching her with that calculating look. "Tell me, what's the most difficult piece you can play?" The question caught Nina off guard. "Well, I'm working on Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 for my final recital this year." One of the men at the table whistled. "That's supposed to be one of the hardest pieces ever written." "It is," Nina acknowledged. "It's challenging, but beautiful." Thomas swirled his bourbon, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Rachmaninoff, huh? That's quite ambitious for a waitress." The way he said waitress made it sound like an insult. Nina felt a flash of irritation but pushed it down. This man could easily get her fired with one complaint to Richard. I should check on your desserts, she said, turning to leave. Wait. Thomas's voice stopped her. I have a proposition for you. The entire table fell silent, watching their exchange with interest. A proposition? Nina repeated cautiously. Thomas gestured to the piano. Play something for us. Right now. Nina glanced around the crowded restaurant. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm working, and Antonio is the only one authorized to play during regular service hours. I'm sure your manager would make an exception, Thomas said with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. In fact, let's ask him. Before Nina could protest, Thomas waved Richard over. My friends and I would like to hear your waitress. Play the piano, Thomas announced as if it were the most reasonable request in the world. Richard's face froze in a strained smile. Mr. Reynolds, I'm afraid that's not possible during dinner service. Nina will be playing tomorrow night if you'd like to return then. I'll be in New York tomorrow, Thomas said dismissively. And I'm curious now. Apparently she can play Rachmaninoff. Richard shot Nina a look that clearly asked, What did you say to him? It came up in conversation, Nina explained quickly. But I told Mr. Reynolds that I'm working right now. What if I made it worth your while? Thomas said, pulling out his wallet. He laid several $100 bills on the table. $500 for one piece. The table went silent. $500 was more than Nina made in a week of shifts. Mr. Reynolds, Richard began, clearly uncomfortable. Make it 1,000, Thomas said, adding more bills to the stack. He was enjoying this now, playing to his audience of friends who were watching with amused interest. Nina stared at the money. $1,000 would cover next month's rent and help with her tuition payment. But something about the way Thomas was smirking made her hesitate. He wasn't offering because he appreciated music. This was entertainment for him, watching a waitress dance for his amusement. Thank you for the offer, Nina said carefully. But I'm afraid I have to decline. I have tables waiting for their desserts. Thomas's smile faltered slightly. He wasn't used to hearing the word no. 2,000, he said, his voice harder now. $2,000 for 5 minutes of your time. The restaurant had grown quieter as nearby tables began to notice the scene unfolding. Nina could feel eyes on her. Customers, other servers, Richard. $2,000 was impossible to ignore. It would solve so many of her problems. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, though unsure what her answer would be, a loud crash came from across the room. Someone had dropped a tray of glasses. The sound broke the tension and Richard seized the opportunity. Nina, please see to your other tables, he said firmly. Mr. Reynolds, perhaps we could arrange a private performance another time. For now, may I offer complimentary desserts for your table? Thomas held Nina's gaze for a moment longer, then shrugged and leaned back in his chair. Another time then? Nina hurried away, her heart pounding. As she helped clean up the broken glass, Lily appeared beside her. What was that all about? Lily whispered. The whole restaurant is talking about it. He wanted me to play the piano. For his amusement, Nina said, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up glass shards, like I'm some kind of circus performer. For $2,000 I'd play chopsticks and do a backflip, Lily said, her eyes wide. Nina managed a small laugh. I know. I almost said yes. Why didn't you? Nina paused, thinking about it. I don't know. Something about the way he was looking at me, like he was expecting me to fail. The rest of the night, Nina could feel Thomas watching her as she moved around the restaurant. When his party finally left, he tipped generously but wrote something on the back of the receipt. The offer stands. Tomorrow night. Nina put the receipt in her pocket, unsure what to make of it. As she was finishing her side work at the end of the night, Richard approached her. What exactly did you say to Thomas Reynolds? He asked, his expression serious. Nothing, Nina insisted. He asked if I played piano, and I mentioned I'm studying at the conservatory, that's all. Richard sighed. Well, he just called me. He's coming back tomorrow night specifically to hear you play. And he's reserved the entire restaurant for a private party. Nina's mouth fell open. What? But why would he do that? I don't know, Richard said, running a hand through his hair. But he's one of our biggest clients, so whatever game he's playing, we're going along with it. Be ready tomorrow night. And for your sake, I hope you're as good as you think you are. As Nina walked home in the rain that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened, that her life was about to change, for better or worse. All because of a chance encounter with a bored millionaire looking for entertainment. Little did she know just how right she was. Nina barely slept that night. She tossed and turned in her small bed, her mind racing with thoughts of Thomas Reynolds and his challenge. The sound of early morning traffic outside her apartment window finally convinced her to get up. Even though her alarm wouldn't go off for another hour, she made herself a cup of strong coffee and sat at her kitchen table, still in her pajamas. Her roommate Valerie was already gone for her early hospital shift. The small apartment was quiet except for the occasional rumble of the refrigerator. Nina's fingers tapped nervously on the table. She'd been playing piano since she was 5 years old, had performed in dozens of recitals, and was at the top of her class at the conservatory. But something about tonight felt different, more important somehow. Making a sudden decision, she grabbed her phone and called her grandmother. Nina, is everything okay? You never call this early, her grandmother's concerned voice answered. Everything's fine, Grandma Rose, Nina assured her. I have a performance tonight at the restaurant where I work. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Will they let you play regularly now? Nina smiled at her grandmother's enthusiasm. Maybe, but there's this customer, a really rich guy. He's coming specifically to hear me play, and I'm nervous. Nervous, you? The girl who played Beethoven's Fifth at her 8th grade talent show when the pianist got sick? Grandma Rose chuckled. What's really bothering you? Nina sighed. Her grandmother could always see right through her. He's making it into some kind of challenge. Like he doesn't believe a waitress could really play well. He offered me money to play yesterday right in the middle of my shift. Ah, Grandma Rose said knowingly. So it's not about the music. It's about proving yourself. I guess so, Nina admitted. And the thing is, I could really use the money. My tuition payment is due next week. There was a pause before her grandmother spoke again. Nina, listen to me. You play for yourself, not for him. Not for anyone. When you sit at that piano tonight, forget he's there. Forget everyone is there. Play like you did when you were little, just because it made you happy. Nina felt tears welling up in her eyes. I miss you, Grandma. I miss you too, sweetheart. Now go practice, and call me after the performance. I want to hear everything. After hanging up, Nina moved to the small electric keyboard set up in the corner of the living room. It was nothing like a real piano, just 76 keys instead of 88. With a plastic feel that couldn't compare to ivory. But it was all she had at home. She put on her headphones and began to warm up with scales, then moved on to the pieces she planned to play that night. Her fingers moved faster as she gained confidence, losing herself in the music as the morning light grew stronger outside her window. Hours later, she finally stopped, her hands cramping slightly. She'd need to rest them before tonight. Looking at the clock, she realized she'd been playing for over 3 hours without a break. Nina spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation. She washed her hair, carefully ironed her best black dress, and even splurged on a taxi to the restaurant so she wouldn't have to take the subway in her nice clothes. When she arrived at the Golden Note, she was shocked to see a sign on the door, closed for private event. Inside, the regular tables had been rearranged to create a small performance space around the piano. The restaurant looked different somehow, more like a concert venue than a place to eat dinner. Richard met her at the door, looking more stressed than usual. There you are. Go get ready in the break room. Mr. Reynolds will be here with his guests in 30 minutes. Guests? How many people are coming? Nina asked, suddenly feeling underprepared. About 50, Richard said, straightening his tie. Apparently, he invited some pretty important people. The mayor might even show up. Nina's stomach dropped. The mayor? Richard, I thought this was just going to be a regular night of playing background music while people eat. Richard shook his head. Not anymore. Reynolds has turned this into some kind of event. He's paying a fortune for the space, so whatever he wants, he gets. He glanced at Nina's nervous face and his expression softened slightly. Look, just play your best, okay? This could be good for the restaurant. Good for you too. Nina nodded and headed to the break room to collect herself. She found Lily there, dressed in her server uniform. You're working tonight? Nina asked, surprised. Lily nodded. Reynolds requested me specifically. Apparently I'm the only other server he remembers besides you. She looked Nina up and down. You look nice. Nervous? Terrified, Nina admitted, setting down her bag. I thought I'd be playing background music, not giving a concert for the mayor. Well, whatever happens, I've got your back, Lily said, giving Nina's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. And hey, Reynolds is loaded. If you impress him, who knows what could happen. Nina tried to smile, but her face felt frozen. I need a minute alone, if that's okay. Sure thing. I'll come get you when they start arriving. When Lily left, Nina sat down and took several deep breaths. She could do this. She'd played these pieces hundreds of times. Opening her bag, she took out a small frame photo of her grandmother sitting at an old piano, smiling at the camera. Nina had taken it with her to every recital since she was 12. Play for yourself, she whispered, echoing her grandmother's words from that morning. 20 minutes later, Lily knocked on the door. They're here, she said. And Nina? It's not just the mayor. There are some serious music people out there. I recognize the conductor of the symphony. Nina's heart pounded as she followed Lily into the main room. The restaurant was now filled with elegantly dressed people, holding champagne glasses and talking in hushed voices. At the center of it all stood Thomas Reynolds, looking completely in his element as he greeted guests. He spotted Nina and immediately walked over, champagne in hand. Ah, the pianist arrives, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I hope you're ready for your big moment. Nina straightened her shoulders. I am. Excellent. I've told everyone how I discovered this amazing talent serving drinks at my favorite restaurant. They're quite intrigued. He leaned closer. Especially Dean Phillips. Did you know he's looking for new soloists for next season? Nina's eyes widened slightly. No, I didn't. Well, he is. And he's right over there. Thomas nodded toward a corner where the symphony director was talking with a small group. Of course, if you're not up to the challenge. I am, Nina repeated more firmly this time. Thomas's smile widened. We'll see. You'll play after everyone has had a chance to enjoy their drinks. Let's say 20 minutes? As Thomas walked away, Nina felt a hand on her arm. It was Richard, looking worried. What did he say to you? He asked. Nothing important, Nina said, not wanting to explain the complicated mix of intimidation and opportunity that Thomas was dangling in front of her. I should warm up, Richard nodded. The piano tuner came this afternoon, so it should be perfect. Good luck, Nina. Nina made her way to the piano, aware of curious glances following her. As she sat down and adjusted the bench, she tried to focus only on the smooth, cool keys beneath her fingers. She played a few quiet scales to get comfortable with the touch of this particular piano. It was magnificent. A Steinway concert grand that probably cost more than she would make in 10 years of waiting tables. The action was perfect, the tone rich and resonant. Despite her nerves, Nina felt a thrill of excitement at the chance to play such a beautiful instrument. After a few minutes, Thomas tapped a spoon against his glass, calling for attention. The room quieted as he moved to stand beside the piano. Friends, thank you for coming on such short notice, he began, his voice carrying easily through the room. Many of you have heard me talk about supporting young talent in the arts. Tonight I wanted to show you what I mean. Nina felt her cheeks grow warm as all eyes turned to her. This young woman works here as a waitress, Thomas continued, gesturing toward Nina. But she claims to be a serious pianist studying at our city's conservatory. When I heard this, I was naturally skeptical. After all, if she were truly talented, would she be serving our dinners? There were a few uncomfortable chuckles from the audience. Nina's embarrassment turned to anger, but she kept her expression neutral. So I've arranged this little demonstration, Thomas said. Nina will play for us and we'll see if she's as good as she claims to be. If she impresses us, particularly our friend Dean Phillips, he nodded toward the symphony director, perhaps we can help launch a real career. If not, he shrugged, at least we've had a nice evening with good champagne. The audience laughed more heartily this time, and Nina felt her hands begin to shake slightly. This wasn't just a performance. It was a judgment, a test she hadn't known she was taking. Thomas turned to her with that same challenging smile. The floor is yours, Nina. Show us what you can do. The room fell silent as Thomas rejoined his guests. Nina sat frozen for a moment, feeling the weight of 50 pairs of eyes on her. Her original plan had been to play some pleasant, undemanding pieces, Debussy, maybe some Chopin nocturnes. Safe choices for background music. But now, with Thomas's words ringing in her ears, those pieces seemed inadequate. This wasn't about providing pleasant background music anymore. This was about proving herself. Nina thought of her grandmother's words from that morning. Play for yourself, not for him. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Not Debussy. Not Chopin, Rachmaninoff. Piano Concerto No. 3. The piece she'd been working on for months, the one Thomas had scoffed at when she mentioned it. One of the most technically challenging pieces in the piano repertoire. As the first powerful notes filled the room, Nina saw Thomas's eyes widen in surprise. Then she forgot about him, forgot about everyone in the room, and lost herself in the music. The first thunderous chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 filled the restaurant. Nina's fingers moved across the keys with precision and power that seemed impossible for her small frame. The famous opening melody, deceptively simple at first, then building in complexity, rang out clear and confident. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Waiters froze with trays in hand. Every eye in the room turned toward the piano, where the young woman they had dismissed as just a waitress was performing one of the most difficult pieces in classical piano literature. Thomas Reynolds stood motionless, his champagne glass halfway to his lips, his expression shifting from smug certainty to confusion, then to dawning amazement. This was not what he had expected. Not at all. Nina was no longer aware of him or anyone else in the room. Her world had narrowed to just her hands and the piano. Each note flowed into the next as her fingers danced across the keys, sometimes gentle, sometimes with striking force. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her face showing the emotion of the music, now intense concentration, now a hint of a smile as she navigated a particularly challenging passage. The first movement built toward its climax, and Nina leaned into the piano as if physically pushing the music forward. Her left hand anchored the piece with powerful chords while her right hand executed rapid, intricate runs up and down the keyboard. Years of training, thousands of hours of practice all came together in this moment. When the movement ended, there was a beat of stunned silence. Then the room erupted in applause. Nina looked up, momentarily disoriented as she was pulled back to reality. The faces looking back at her were transformed. Where there had been polite indifference or outright skepticism, there was now genuine admiration, even awe. She caught Thomas's eye. He was clapping along with everyone else, but his expression was complex. Impressed, certainly, but also calculating, as if recalibrating his assessment of her. Beside him, Dean Phillips from the symphony was leaning forward, watching Nina with keen interest. Richard, standing near the bar, gave her an encouraging nod. Lily, who had been serving drinks, shot her a subtle thumbs up. Nina took a deep breath. The first movement was only the beginning. There were still 2 more to go, including the third movement with its notorious technical challenges. She flexed her fingers and positioned her hands once more. As she began the second movement with its more lyrical, introspective quality, Nina closed her eyes. This part of the concerto always made her think of her grandmother, of quiet evenings in their small apartment. The old upright piano slightly out of tune but still beautiful in her grandmother's skilled hands. Music is a language, Grandma Rose used to say. When words aren't enough, music speaks for you. Tonight, Nina was speaking volumes. Through her playing, she expressed everything she couldn't say aloud. Her frustration at being underestimated, her pride in her hard-won skills, her determination to succeed despite the odds, and most of all, her pure love of music itself. The second movement flowed into the third without pause. This was where many pianists faltered. The finale was a test of endurance as much as skill, with its relentless tempo and technical demands. But Nina had prepared for this. She had practiced this movement until her hands cramped, until her roommates begged her to stop, until she could play it in her sleep. Her fingers flew across the keys with almost superhuman speed and precision. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her focus never wavered. The music built toward its final, triumphant conclusion, and Nina poured everything she had into those last measures. When the final chord resonated through the room, Nina's hands hovered above the keys for a moment, then slowly lowered to her lap. She was breathing hard as if she'd run a race. In a way, she had. The silence lasted only a heartbeat before the room exploded in applause and cheers. People were standing, some calling bravo. Nina looked up, dazed as the sound washed over her. She hadn't expected this, had never played for an audience that responded with such enthusiasm. Thomas Reynolds was applauding with the rest, his face showing genuine respect for perhaps the first time. Beside him, Dean Phillips was beaming. As the applause continued, Thomas stepped forward, gesturing for quiet. The room gradually settled down, though excited whispers continued to ripple through the crowd. "Well," Thomas said, his voice carrying easily, "I think we can all agree that was unexpected." He looked at Nina with new eyes. "It seems I owe you an apology, Nina. When you told me you could play Rachmaninoff, I didn't believe you. I thought it was just the kind of thing waitresses say to sound impressive to customers." Nina felt a flash of irritation at his patronizing tone, but before she could respond, Dean Phillips stepped forward. "If I may," he said, addressing both Nina and the room at large. "That was no amateur performance. Ms. Garcia, your technique is extraordinary and your interpretation shows both intelligence and emotional depth." He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed something quite special. This young woman deserves to be playing on much bigger stages than this." Nina felt tears pricking at her eyes. Coming from the symphony director, these words meant everything. "In fact," Dean continued, "we have an opening for a soloist in our Young Artist Concert Series next month. One of our scheduled performers had to withdraw due to injury." He looked directly at Nina. "I'd like to offer you that spot if you're interested." Nina couldn't speak. This was beyond anything she had imagined when she walked into the restaurant that evening. She managed to nod, a smile breaking across her face. The crowd applauded again, clearly delighted by this unexpected turn of events. As the noise died down, Thomas stepped forward once more. "Well, this calls for a celebration," he announced. "Champagne for everyone." As waiters moved through the crowd with trays of filled glasses, Thomas approached the piano. "That was truly remarkable," he said to Nina, his voice lower now, meant only for her. "I've attended concerts at Carnegie Hall that weren't half as impressive." "Thank you," Nina said simply. Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "As promised, $2,000 for your performance tonight." Nina looked at the envelope but didn't take it. "I didn't play for your money, Mr. Reynolds." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "No, then why did you play?" "For myself," Nina said, thinking of her grandmother's words. "And maybe a little bit to prove you wrong." Thomas laughed, a genuine laugh this time. "Fair enough. But take it anyway. You've earned it." When she still hesitated, he added, "Consider it your first professional fee. From what Dean just said, it certainly won't be your last." Finally, Nina accepted the envelope. "Thank you." "No, thank you," Thomas said, surprising her, "for reminding me what it looks like when someone has real passion for what they do." He glanced around at the crowd of wealthy, powerful people mingling in the restaurant. "It's easy to forget that sometimes in my world." Before Nina could respond, they were interrupted by a stream of guests coming to congratulate her. Important people who had barely glanced at her when she served their food now wanted to shake her hand, to tell her how moved they were by her playing, to ask where they could hear her perform again. Through it all, Nina felt as if she were in a dream. Just hours ago, she had been worrying about making rent and paying tuition. Now, the symphony director was discussing performance dates with her. A famous music critic was asking for an interview, and Thomas Reynolds, who had set out to humiliate her, was telling anyone who would listen that he had discovered an amazing new talent. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Lily appeared at Nina's side with a glass of water. "You were incredible," she said, giving Nina a quick hug. "I had no idea you could play like that." "Why are you working here when you can do that?" Nina took a grateful sip of water. "Because talent doesn't pay the bills unless someone important notices it." She glanced toward Dean Phillips, who was exchanging contact information with Richard. "And tonight someone did." "So I guess you won't be serving tables with me anymore," Lily said, looking both happy for her friend and a little sad. "I don't know about that," Nina replied. "One concert invitation doesn't make a career. I'll probably still need this job for a while." "Maybe," Lily said. But everything's different now. You know that, right? Nina nodded slowly. Everything was different. She had walked into the Golden Note that evening as Nina Garcia, waitress and struggling music student. She would leave as Nina Garcia, pianist, someone whose talent had been recognized, whose dreams suddenly seemed within reach. As the last guest departed, Nina found herself alone at the piano once more. The restaurant was quiet now, the excitement of the evening fading into a peaceful stillness. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, marveling at how this instrument had changed her life in a single night. On impulse, she began to play again, not Rachmaninoff this time, but a simple melody her grandmother had taught her when she was small. A lullaby from the old country, sweet and gentle. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't notice Richard approach until he spoke. "Nina," he said softly. "It's late. We need to close up." She stopped playing and looked up. "Sorry, I got carried away." Richard smiled, a genuine smile unlike his usual stressed expression. "It's fine. Play as long as you want. After tonight, I think you've earned the right." He hesitated, then added, "You know, the regular pianist position is still open. If you want it," Nina thought about it. $200 a week to play at the Golden Note. Just days ago, that had seemed like an amazing opportunity. "Thank you," she said, "but I think I might be busy with other performances soon." Richard nodded, understanding. "Well, the offer stands. Either way, I don't think I'll be seeing you carrying trays much longer." As Nina finally gathered her things to leave, she felt her phone buzz in her bag. It was a text from her grandmother. "How did it go tonight?" Nina smiled as she typed her reply. "I played for myself, just like you said. Call you tomorrow with the whole story. It's a good one." She stepped out into the cool night air, the envelope with $2,000 safely tucked in her purse, Dean Phillips's business card in her pocket, and a future suddenly bright with possibility, all because a rich man had challenged a waitress to play the piano, and she had accepted. 3 months later, Nina stood backstage at Wilson Hall, the city's most prestigious concert venue. Through a small gap in the curtains, she could see the packed auditorium, nearly 2,000 seats, almost all filled. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down the front of her black concert gown. 5 minutes. "Miss Garcia," a stagehand informed her quietly before hurrying away. Nina took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. How had so much changed so quickly? The morning after her impromptu performance at the Golden Note, videos had appeared online. Someone had recorded her playing Rachmaninoff on their phone, and the video had spread like wildfire. "Waitress stuns millionaire with classical piano skills," read one headline. "Restaurant server revealed as piano prodigy," claimed another. Nina had laughed at that one. At 24, she was hardly a prodigy, just someone who had worked incredibly hard for many years. Dean Phillips had been true to his word. Not only had he offered her the solo spot in the Young Artist series, but after hearing her audition with the full symphony, he had moved her to tonight's main concert, a fundraising gala attended by the city's elite. The same wealthy crowd that had once ignored her as she refilled their water glasses would now be watching her perform on stage. Nina peered through the curtains again, scanning the audience. In the third row, she spotted her grandmother, looking elegant in a blue dress that Nina had bought for her with part of her first paycheck as a professional musician. Beside Grandma Rose sat Lily and Valerie, Nina's former roommate. They were all beaming with excitement. A few rows back, Nina saw a familiar face, Thomas Reynolds. She hadn't spoken to him since that night at the restaurant, though she'd received an enormous bouquet of flowers from him the next day, with a note that simply read, "I've never been happier to be proven wrong. TR." The flowers had been followed by invitations to exclusive music events and introductions to influential people in the classical music world. Nina had been suspicious of his motives at first, but gradually came to understand that Thomas, for all his arrogance, genuinely appreciated talent and seemed determined to make up for his initial dismissiveness. 2 minutes, the stagehand called. Nina closed her eyes and thought about everything that had happened since that night. She had quit her job at the Golden Note, though Richard had insisted she could come back any time. Her final paycheck had included a bonus from the owner, who was enjoying the restaurant's newfound fame as the place where Nina Garcia was discovered. The conservatory had awarded her a full scholarship for her final year after her professors saw the video. "We always knew you were talented," her piano instructor had said, but that performance showed something special, a fire we hadn't seen before. Nina had moved to a better apartment, one with enough space for the used baby grand piano she'd purchased with some of her earnings. She'd helped her grandmother pay off medical bills that had been hanging over them for years. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't constantly worried about money. But more important than the material changes were the other ones. The confidence she now carried, the knowledge that she had faced a challenge and risen to it, the certainty that she belonged in the world of music not as an outsider looking in, but as an equal. "It's time, Ms. Garcia." The stage manager appeared at her elbow. Nina nodded and followed him to the wings of the stage. The concertmaster had just finished tuning the orchestra. Conductor Philip Chen, one of the most respected maestros in the country, waited by the entrance to the stage to escort her on. "Nervous?" he asked with a kind smile. "Terrified," Nina admitted. Conductor Chen chuckled. "After Rachmaninoff's Third, this Tchaikovsky should be a walk in the park for you." "It's not the piece that scares me," Nina said. "It's all those people." "Ah, but you've already won them over," he reminded her. "Now you just have to play for yourself." Nina smiled at the echo of her grandmother's words. "That's what my grandma always says. Smart woman." The conductor glanced at the stage manager, who gave a nod. "Ready?" Nina took one last deep breath. "Ready." The applause began as soon as they stepped onto the stage. Nina walked to the gleaming concert grand piano at center stage, her posture straight, her chin high despite her nervousness. She had practiced this walk as carefully as she had practiced the music, no longer a waitress who should fade into the background, but an artist who commanded attention. She took her seat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and nodded to Conductor Chen. As the orchestra began the opening bars of Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1, Nina allowed herself one quick glance at her grandmother in the audience. Grandma Rose gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement, her eyes shining with tears of pride. Then Nina's fingers touched the keys, and everything else fell away. There was only the music flowing through her like a river, carrying her along in its current. The concert passed in what felt like both an eternity and an instant. When the final triumphant chords rang out, Nina barely registered the thunderous standing ovation, the shower of flowers thrown onto the stage, the conductor's hand helping her up for bow after bow. It wasn't until she was backstage again, surrounded by well-wishers, that the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. She had done it, performed as a soloist with a professional symphony orchestra, and done it well. "Darling, you were magnificent." Grandma Rose embraced her, tears streaming down her face. "Your grandfather would have been so proud." Lily and Valerie were next, hugging her and talking over each other in their excitement. The whole restaurant staff was watching the live stream, Lily told her. Richard set up a big screen in the dining room. "Everyone was cheering for you." Dean Phillips approached with a group of board members. "Spectacular performance, Nina. Absolutely spectacular. We'd like to discuss next season's program with you when you have time." Nina nodded, still somewhat dazed by it all. As the crowd around her continued to grow, she caught sight of Thomas Reynolds waiting patiently at the edge of the group. When there was finally a break in the stream of congratulations, he stepped forward. "Congratulations, Ms. Garcia," he said formally, extending his hand. "You played beautifully tonight." "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," Nina replied, equally formal as they shook hands. Then, her voice softening, she added, "And thank you for the challenge. I might not be standing here if you hadn't pushed me that night." Thomas shook his head. "You would have found your way here eventually. Talent like yours can't stay hidden forever." He hesitated, then continued, "Though I'm glad I could play some small part in speeding up the process." "Small part?" Nina raised an eyebrow. "You rented out an entire restaurant and invited the symphony director just to see if a waitress could really play Rachmaninoff." Thomas laughed. "When you put it that way, it does sound a bit extreme. But in my defense, I did offer you $2,000. "Best money you ever spent?" Nina asked with a small smile. "Without question," Thomas replied seriously, "though I hope you'll allow me to invest more substantially in your career going forward. My foundation supports young artists, and you're exactly the kind of talent we look for." Before Nina could respond, Conductor Chen appeared with more well-wishers. and Thomas stepped back with a small nod of understanding. There would be time for business discussions later. The celebration continued at a reception in the grand lobby of the concert hall. Nina moved through the crowd accepting congratulations, answering questions about her training, discussing potential future performances. It was strange to be on this side of such an event, to be the guest of honor rather than the person serving drinks and canapes.